The opinions and views expressed on this program do not reflect those of the management or staff of Community Media of Staten Island.
All statements, opinions, and views expressed in this program are for educational purposes only and are not a substitute for medical advice or recommendations of any type. You should consult with your medical professional before any diet or exercise program.
Thank you for joining the 50 Plus Fit Club. Please welcome your host, the trainer motivator, medical exercise specialist, Tony Buxaviles.
Hello, my name is Tony Buxaviles, and welcome to the 50 Plus Fit Club, where we discuss health, fitness, wellness, and weight loss, specifically for people 50 and over to share the secrets to divine health, a dynamic body, and a phenomenal life.
The Ozempic episode.
Welcome to this episode of 50 Plus Fit Club. It is my pleasure to welcome back Dr. Kathy Chadman, who is a researcher in neuroscience and also has a PhD in pharmacology, and who's also was my partner in crime in our previous episode about Ozempic, which really sparked a lot of controversy but in a good way, because it gives us the opportunity to address some questions that people who watched the first episode about Ozempic here at 50 Plus Fit Club. And so we can hopefully answer some questions and really spark conversation regarding what people are thinking about this medication. So for people who don't know what Ozempic is, if you watch the other interview, we discussed the GLP-1 agonist. So I'm going to recommend, if you really want to get more information about exactly what it is, to watch the first episode, because obviously Ozempic has come to fruition in general population and pop culture about being a very effective weight loss drug that has really sparked a lot of usage throughout the country and I think throughout the world, regarding people who are looking to see about managing their weight and overcoming some of the challenges with diabetes. So I'm going to just talk about some of the questions that got asked, and then that'll spark our conversation. We can take this wherever that you want to go. Now, what happened overall with many people was when I started asking them about their experience was they started talking about, asking about questions. They started talking about their experiences. But the people who were inquiring really wanted to know about the side effects of not just Ozempic, but with some of the GLP-1s. So let me just read the first question, which was, is lipidemia is abnormal fat buildup on both sides of your lower body, usually in the legs, but it can also be in the arms, and it can cause pain and make daily activities really difficult. Lipidemia doesn't respond to diet and exercise of ordinary fat. Can the semaglutide type of drugs be used for lipidemia?
I don't know the science on that, but my guess would be that yes. And the reason I'm saying that is because they act as a very good anti-inflammatory. And if you're less inflamed, then lipidemia is that build up all those fluids.
Right.
If you're less inflamed, there's more routes for them to get out.
Right.
I believe you talked with some other people about, with exercise, it helps flex, and the lymphatic system is really important for kind of clearing, being the garbage truck, getting all those toxins and other things out of your system.
Right.
So my guess would be that it might help people. It has a very good chance of helping people with lipidemia.
Now, I wonder if there's been any studies or any type of any background regarding that.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I haven't looked myself, but
but from a theoretic standpoint, it sounds like there'd be something, even if it doesn't exist now, that could be something that may be the case in the future.
yes.
All right, so here's another one. My question is in the veins of these comments, because he was reading the comments that were online on Facebook. With all the better options out there, why is there not a medical doctorate in nutrition? I'm not saying you should be prescribed diet and exercise, but why doesn't the medical establishment have more doctors like, I guess it's Louis Aron, who offer actual diets to their obesity patients?
I mean, obesity has kind of been the third rail of medicine for a long time because diet and exercise are just what the doctors were taught, the MDs. And it was people who was obese's fault for not actually following through. It was never that the advice was not actually enough.
But I think that, honestly, that they weren't taught in a manner to be able to really prescribe it as much as to recommend it, but recommend it in a very, very nebulous manner. To say that you really need to eat right and exercise, but not really to put that together as a plan, at least not a plan to overcome chronic disease.
Right.
It was recommended or suggested, but not really prescribed. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, so I think for medical school, they may have one class on it. Now, what this person seems to be suggesting, though, is an actual doctorate of nutrition, which may actually exist.
I'm sure it does exist.
I'm sure it does, too.
I know the Masters in Nutrition exists. I'm pretty sure people can get their PhD in nutrition.
I'm sure they can, too. And there's where you might actually find exciting things because they're not as hampered by some of the rules that MDs are, so that they could actually potentially do the research on these different things. But I'm not aware of what they're doing.
But see, I would challenge that point of view too, because it's this has really sparked so much controversy with people, where the topic started to switch away from actually what the mechanism and the reason behind the drug is. And that's not I'm waving the flag of the drug. I just want to make sure that, from my perspective, that I understand the proper usage of it and then the expected outcome of it, rather than just saying, okay, this thing should not exist, but the acknowledgement of the fact that it does exist and where should it be best utilized. So I guess what he's saying is well, rather than use the drug, shouldn't we just have people, follow diet and exercise protocols?
I mean, that's been the thing for the last 30 years, and the rates, as you showed in the earlier episode, just keep going up and up and up. If that was enough, don't you think it would have worked by now? And the obesity rates would at least be leveling off instead of increasing?
Well, do you think that, let's just go there, that there is a tendency for people to go on to shaming folks who seemingly would require this level of medical intervention in order to see about getting their weight to what would be considered a healthy level? Does it feel like that comment is that?
Yes.
You're not thinking about it. I wish, honestly, this is from my standpoint, that collectively that we could get past it as it being, and I'm not trying to say that there may be some people who are using the medication for nefarious reasons and as shortcuts to see about getting some type of aesthetic result, but I don't think that's really what we're talking about here. Right? I think we're talking about people who, for whatever reason may be, no judgment, they're just having a struggle with this, and they're utilizing it as a mechanism to overcome whatever kind of systemic deficiency that there may be, and then being able to accomplish their weight loss goals.
I mean, I think that's one of those things that this medication is helping doing and showing to the world, is that what if it is a hormonal imbalance? that just, it can't be corrected solely with diet and exercise. It actually, you need a little help. We have many other diseases where that's the case.
Right.
I mean, I'm not for always, just to take a pill to make yourself better. I'm always interested in how they work and everything.
Right.
But there are some things that we don't just innately heal from.
Right. Right.
You know, people who have depression, you know, their neurotransmitters are imbalanced.
Right.
And if they need a pill to balance them out, you know, they've probably tried all the things. They've tried diet and exercise.
Right,
but do we expect their brains are just going to start balancing the way they should?
But I mean, what about the bandwidth for people to be able to do all the things simultaneously that will hopefully yield a positive result? I mean, can we give people that level of grace?
It's so interesting. You know, I can only talk about it from my own perspective because I'm pretty open about it. I tell everybody, I was like, yeah, no, I'm doing this and this. But I follow some of the forums and so many people, there's so much judgment out there.
Yeah.
Well, you lost weight, but you didn't do it. You know, you didn't work for it. So it doesn't count?
It doesn't.
My health is better and that's not enough?
It doesn't. No, it doesn't count. It's not enough. For many people, the requirement is that you need to be able to put forth all the energy that I've done in order for you to get the results, because I know someone just like you who did this, who did that, the other, and they got the result, but you weren't willing to do it.
I watched The Biggest Loser, and you didn't work out 6 hours a day and throw up in a bucket because you pushed yourself beyond what you could. So therefore, do you actually deserve to be healthy?
Yeah. I have a little challenge with that. Let's go to another question. Has resistance training been proven in human studies to slow or prevent Ozempic-related musculoskeletal loss? He says this will save him time to looking into it.
I mean, like I said, I'm not up on that research. My guess would be yes, basically, because if you're building up muscle, and then when the weight loss comes, it's probably going to start taking it from the most available sources that aren't being needed at the moment.
Right.
But if you're actively building your muscles, then your muscles need it, and your body knows that. Yeah. Like, our bodies go for homeostasis all the time.
Exactly.
They're going to go for the easy energy sources, which in that case would be your fat cells first.
Exactly. I mean, my expert opinion would be that if you're doing things to assist with the retention of muscle tissue, because obviously the stimulation would come from utilization of some level of resistance, right? And if you're giving your body the stimulus for that, especially because if you're using Ozempic, that means you're still consuming calories, right? So you'd assume that you could increase your protein intake, which would give the building blocks of necessary for muscle retention at the very least. And if you're performing resistance exercise, to me it stands to reason that you would put your body potentially in a place where you would be able to retain muscle tissue. Now, if you're cutting your calories significantly as a result, it may be difficult for you to build muscle. I could see that.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? I could see that for sure. But the retention of muscle tissue, or at least the development of the functionality of your muscle tissue, right? Which means, can I continue to do my activities of daily living, or fitness or athletics, whatever it may be, that you should be able to retain that if you're giving your body the necessary commensurate stimulus.
I would think so too. But the other thing that if you think about, once a person loses a significant amount of weight, I mean, you probably know this from talking about like knee replacements and hip replacements. When you're putting so much less pressure on your joints, you also don't need as much strength to haul your butt around.
That's true.
When you're 40 pounds lighter than you were.
Right.
So your legs don't actually need to be as strong.
That's very true.
So if you lose some muscle, as long as it's not too much,
right,
it may actually go along with what's happening. And remember too, I think you're talking a lot about skeletal muscle.
Right.
But we also have smooth muscle in our bodies.
Right.
And those we're using all the time anyway.
Right.
And as far as I know, I don't think there's any loss there.
Right. Right. Well, that'd be interesting to find out. I have to look at those. So, Joe, I have to do some studying on that. But in the meantime, from the standpoint of what makes sense to me, from my experience, my expert opinion would be that. Here's another one. This is a very good one. I'm not sure if this was covered in part 1, but how much does it cost to produce a 1-month supply and how much the consumer versus how much the consumer is charged?
That could be a whole episode in and of
That is
itself.
a loaded question.
Now, I am personally, I've been a little more interested in the other drug Zepbound, which is very similar to Ozempic. We talked about it in the previous episode. And, you know, people in the United States, we're paying not like 10 times more, but like 100 times more than people in other countries, which is just a product of our medical system. I don't know. There's some things in the world I'm not sure if it's okay to talk about, but like some people, because of the cost, you know, because there's been shortages, the compounding pharmacies have been able to provide it. This whole month has actually been a big controversy because the FDA they said the shortage was over for Zepbound, and they pulled the compounding's ability to provide it for 2 weeks. And then after more pressure, they decided to open an investigation and allowed it again. So the compounding pharmacies, there's quite a range of prices, and there's, you know, it's whether or not you trust it. I'm not going to go into that.
So explain the compounding pharmacies, right? Because you have these drugs that have been produced by the companies that produce the different versions of them, right? And then you have the compounding pharmacies that basically they're saying they're not producing Ozempic in and of itself, but they're producing like a different brand of the same type of medication.
Basically. So Ozempic is a compound called semaglutide. And so anybody can make semaglutide. Anybody can, right? It's a chemical reaction. A lot of places in China have a lot of chemical factories. And anybody can buy semaglutide and then, you know, put it into a solution. So there's two kinds of compounding pharmacies, 503A and 503B. They are actually regulated. There are ones, if you have one that's not regulated, don't buy from them. Make sure it's a good one that has a good reputation. So basically, they're just buying it and putting it into solution. Now they're allowed to do it. They're called compounding pharmacies because, you know, like some kids, like they can't take a pill, so they have to get a liquid drug and they want a little flavor in it. They would then go to a compounding pharmacy to make that because they couldn't buy it from the traditional supplier.
Gotcha.
So that's why compounding pharmacies exist. And that's why they may continue to exist for these drugs, even if the FDA says there's no longer a shortage. They're just going to add something to them, compound it, to make them available. But they can make it for significantly cheaper than the name brand, as everything is. Now, again, I know Zepbound better, which is Eli Lilly. They put it in those pens, you know, so that's what they're doing. They're making it, they're putting it in the pens, and they've done all the research to know how long the stable shelf life is and everything. And that's what you're paying for, you know, is a bit of security.
Right.
Because that drug has gone through, that company has provided, they've gone through a strict FDA process, everything's regulated, they're tested regularly. With the compounding facilities, you don't know, I mean, like I said, if you find a good reputable one and it's got the license, you're hoping they go through the same thing. But they're not doing as much testing on theirs. So, for example, most of them have a shorter shelf life.
Okay.
Not necessarily because they're going to degrade any faster or it's any different, but because they don't have the studies to show that it hasn't changed over different periods of time.
Gotcha. So it may be the same, it's just that they can't prove it as yet.
Right.
Okay, I get that.
And the compounding facilities also don't put it into the injectors.
Okay.
So, you know, the injectors, you just have to like turn a little thing, press a button, and it puts the injection in for you. And for people who are scared of needles, they don't even have to really see the needle. But the compounding facilities just give it to you in a vial, and you have to pretend you're a nurse and learn how to pull it up and figure out the right dosage, which they explain on the sheets, and then give yourself. It's a subcutaneous injection, so it doesn't have to go deep.
Right.
But, you know, people who aren't comfortable with needles, that can be another area where they might be afraid. Now, some really brave people will actually find sources of the drug and buy the powdered form itself and get bacteriostatic saline and actually weigh it out and try and make their own concentrations. And that's really cheap, but it's also really difficult, and the quality control is a little more you know, each level where you're paying less, the quality control, the oversight isn't quite as strong. So you've
And
got to be careful.
You also have to maintain the sterility of all the equipment that you're using as well.
So with the vials, if you're going to do that, you have to make sure, they always send alcohol swabs to make sure you wipe off the top of the vial every single time.
Yeah.
The syringes are always come sterile. So as long as you're not touching it to anything else, it's usually okay.
Right. But you're responsible for more of the maintenance of it. Yeah.
Yes, maintaining the sterility, because you don't want anything to get in that vial.
No.
Because if something grows in there and you're injecting it, you don't want any part of that.
No, definitely not. But one of the part of the research, there was a YouTube video that I watched that basically said that people in Europe are paying a fraction of what. And they said that also, what is the name of the company? It's Nordic.
Novo Nordisk does semaglutide, yeah.
Yeah, they say that the profit margin, and this may be something to get involved if you are an investor of certain type. They say the markup is 50,000%.
Again, I know Zepbound better. The market price, if you don't have insurance coverage, I believe is around $1,300. Eli Lilly gives a coupon that brings it down to $550, I believe, $500, $550.
Right.
The compounding pharmacies, depending on the dose, which Eli Lilly, they have changed their thing a little bit recently, but depending on the dose, the higher the dose is, it's a little more expensive, but it's usually, you can get it somewhere between $300 to $500.
Right.
For a month's supply.
Yeah, but this report, and it was from a reputable source, and forgive me for not knowing exactly what it was, but they're saying that people in Europe are spending like $100 a month.
Because we're the only country that doesn't have national medicine. And therefore, their governments are negotiating those prices. We don't have that.
Right.
And so the U.S. pays for a lot of things that happen in the rest of the world. Because the drug prices are high because in general, a lot of times, we're paying for the research that happens too.
Right. So and even though they may say that it's at this stage of the game that this is what it costs for manufacturing, they had all that capital cost with research and development before they got to this point.
And the other thing, it's not just this drug. They probably had to research 100 to have this one come out and actually go out and make them a profit.
Right.
And the others got discarded along the way for whatever reasons.
Right. So even though the profit margin may seem obscene, right, but we're not,
it's really funding the next thing.
It's funding the next thing and also funded what they needed to before they got to this point. So the markup is pretty tremendous, but that's not the only factor.
A story of somebody, apparently if you go to England and you have an address, which a hotel can be, you can get it there for like $60. And so some people are like, it's cheaper to go to London and stay for a day, see a show or something, and have some delivered to your door.
That's pretty wild.
It is to buy it in the United States.
That is wild. So the markup is a lot. To answer that question, the markup is a lot, but there's other things associated with it.
I personally still think it's too high. I'm not even. I understand where they're coming from.
Yeah, especially if in a situation like if it's going to assist people to overcome other types of chronic diseases. Like I'm going to be very frank with you. A lot of people in my position in the fitness industry feel very, very put off, intimidated, and afraid of Ozempic taking over the weight loss industry. I mean, for me, I don't feel intimidated at all, and primarily because I understand that nutrition and exercise are still going to be a major component. And obviously some people, it's going to work for some people, it's going to work, and it's going to not work for some people. But, weight loss for some people is going to be a component of health, but it's not going to be the only one. Like I think that we found that the exercise and healthy eating is still crucial, right, to the effectiveness of the usage of the medication.
And it could actually be the opposite true, right? That as people start losing weight and aren't hurting as much, they're going to be more likely, like the weight loss industry may lose people, but the trainers and other people who help people with their physical activity, they may actually get a boost. They may get more people because they're feeling better and they may not know how to get started and may actually be seeking out different opportunities to get that physical exercise now that they feel like they can.
Right, I agree. And also, weight loss is not necessarily equal fitness, right? So even though, like you're implying, I'm assuming that once they've lost the weight, now they're saying, okay, well, let me explore some of my fitness opportunities here, right? So let's go to the next question. I would like to know why the medical system would approve a drug for people who are not diabetic. I have spoken to people who are not close to overweight that are taking it due to their fear of gaining weight. Drugs are never the answer. They are damaging people for profit. This is part of the controversy that we...
I feel that this person might need some education about how everything works. Sometimes drugs are the resort you need. Whether or not this is the case, I suppose, if you don't need it, it's really easy to have judgments about whether or not other people do.
Right.
I'm going to say, first of all, they have two different markets. Semaglutide is the drug. Ozempic is actually marketed for people who have diabetes. It's not supposed to be given to anybody else. Wegovy, which is also semaglutide, is the one that is marketed for people who are overweight, who have obesity without diabetes.
Do they function pretty similarly?
They're the exact same thing.
Okay, it's just how they're positioned.
But the FDA has given them approval to use this drug to treat these two different conditions.
Okay.
But it's all FDA, right? You have to have the FDA approval, and so and they've chosen to market it this way.
Okay. But they would have to come to the FDA with this purpose, right?
They absolutely did.
So I guess that's one of the major reasons why the Ozempic has got that diabetic position, and then
I'm sure the Ozempic one came first because it's easier to get.
Because that would be more perceived as being medical as compared to weight loss. I guess it's kind of there,
Again,
but not.
This goes back to that public perception: is obesity a medical condition, or is it just a lazy person thing?
Yes.
And I'm going to advocate that I don't think people who are obese are just lazy. I think there's a lot more going on, and some of it is medical. And if we look at it and take that pejorative, or take that judgment away from it, and just be like, this is a medical condition, this is how we can treat it. Why would you want to take that away from people?
Because it almost sounds to me like saying, okay, well, your arm is broken because you like to climb fences, so we're not going to give you a cast.
Exactly.
Let's see how you heal on your own, right? But we would never say that to someone who's in a situation that would be just so blatant, because for some reason or another that people who struggle in this area are stigmatized and said, well, it's because of this, because you're lazy. And I'm going to make an admission. I mean, I was one of those gym people probably 30 years ago who might have felt that way. But I know that entering into this realm and being able to not see a person, not to see people, but to see a person, and to be hands-on with people and take this journey with them, has made me exceedingly empathetic when it comes to this. Because if I had the benefit of not having to deal with that, and all of a sudden I'm dealing with it with someone who I know, love, and care about, obviously I want whatever is going to help them to get whatever they need to for their outcome.
I mean, I obviously agree, and I have been heavy my whole life. But I was a student athlete too. I played sports in high school, and not at the level you did, but also in college. But I was always the heaviest girl on the team. I still did everything.
Right.
I didn't let it hold me back, but I have heard stories that other people, feel that people look at them differently, or they're, if you have 3 job candidates and one's heavy, that might, even if they're all equal, you might not want to hire them because that perception exists.
Yeah. And I've known people who've hired people as part of their, careers, and it is an issue. It is definitely an issue. Now here we have someone addressing the medical system, right? And which is really controversial, because I mean, a lot of people, I don't want to say that I question the medical system, or I don't question medical professionals. I do question the system, for sure. I think anyone with any level of experience and education should question the system. I think most of the questions I've gotten regarding the medical system has come from medical professionals, in all honesty. So, do you think that maybe that these medications are too accessible for people who are looking to see about utilizing them only for aesthetic outcomes?
I've got to be honest. I don't want to go there. I don't want to. You have to make a lot of assumptions when you want to go and say that. You have to make the assumption that you know what's going on in that person's head, and that you know what's going on in their lives and their health. What if, they don't look like they need to lose weight, but they've got fatty liver disease, or they've got something else that doesn't show on the outside?
Right.
Who are we to say why someone should be taking a drug. I personally feel that should be very much between the person and their provider. And hopefully they're having in-depth discussions about what their goals are, why they need it, what their test results are, trying to really assess their physiology and if these drugs are going to help. People are using these drugs and they're losing weight, and then they get to goal weight. And we don't know really a whole lot about what happens afterwards yet.
True.
Because the usage is fairly new, but it's kind of established that they're going to have to be some sort of maintenance.
Right.
It's probably one of those ones that if you go cold turkey and you get off of it within time, not necessarily no matter what, I'm sure some people are able to keep it off, but most people will start hearing that food noise again and will find it really difficult to keep the weight off. So there may be lots of skinny people out there in 5 years who want to maintain, want to use it to not gain the weight that they had trouble losing before.
Right.
So I think, you can't just look at somebody and know their story.
Well, one of the things that and I can even put like a time period on it, since 2001, 2002, one of my biggest goals has been to relinquish my feeling of necessity to judge other people. And one of the things associated with that has just been that you just don't know what that person's going through. And I'd rather see about offering them somewhat options and assistance rather than judgment. And
respecting them when they make those decisions,
True.
Even if they aren't necessarily the same ones that you would make.
True. That's a very, very good point. So this sparks one of the other questions. After losing the weight on Ozempic, how do you know when it's right to stop taking it? Is the weight going to come right back? Should it be used on and off after getting to goal weight to prevent the weight from coming back?
Honestly, this is a question that I'm very interested in myself because I don't know the answer. And I don't think many people do. So I think right now we're all a bunch of test subjects trying to figure it out. I have a ways to go personally before I get there, so I'm kind of relying on other people's experience to see what works for them.
Right.
I suspect, from what I'm hearing in the different forums and whatnot, when people get to goal weight, they expect to stay on it, but they want to either start titrating the doses down to take a lower dose and see what happens and keep that going and keep lowering the dose until they get to a point where, if the food noise starts to come back, then they might go, find the dose right above that and stay there.
Right.
Other people are trying to stretch it out so they're not taking it as often.
Yeah.
And, to try and, if that's their maintenance route.
Right.
So, and actually I was just talking to a father of one of my students, and he was telling me that he was so surprised his friend had lost all this weight on Ozempic, and then he started going to the gym and started going to Weight Watchers. And he's like, well, what are you doing that for? You lost all the weight. He's like, well, yeah, I lost all the weight, but now with the, I don't know if I'm going to be able to keep getting the drug.
Right.
I need to have a plan to move forward.
Right.
So I think it's important for everyone to talk to their providers. And, again, we don't have the answers yet, but I suspect, personally, I think I'm going to be on it possibly for the rest of my life, but not at high doses.
Not at high doses. As a matter of fact, I have a client who's on Mounjaro, and he plateaued, and then so at this stage of the game, he's more concerned about putting back the weight on. So I think he lost 50 pounds on it, and then so he's saying I think he brought his dosage down, and I think he's utilizing it every other week.
Okay.
Okay.
So the half-life for Mounjaro, that's Zepbound. They're the same based compound. There's a little difference. Semaglutide, the half-life is 7 days in the bloodstream. Zepbound's 5 days.
Okay. So the shot's once a week.
There was once a week for both.
Right, okay, so he's doing every other week. And I think, but he's experimenting.
That's a strategy, yeah.
He's experimenting. He, too, is he's a pharmacist. So he obviously has a little bit more control in terms of his access to it and then how he can, distribute it because he's got that history. But, it remains, I guess, it's one of those things that you can say remains to be seen. Let's ask this other question. I have tried many things to lose weight, including the GLP-1 option. Up until the last thing I tried, I have gained all the weight back and sometimes even more. First time in my life, I lost 85 pounds and have been able to keep it off for 3.5 years. It wasn't from a GLP option. How will Ozempic alone help in sustaining or optimizing on long-term health once you have achieved your goal? That's very interesting, because she said that she lost the 85 pounds without the GLP option.
Well, back before the pandemic, I also got down to this weight without a GLP. But then life happened, some personal issues, some health issues, and the pandemic, and I put it all back on. So I have sympathy, because I, at the time, was adamant. I lost this weight. I am never putting it on. That will never be me.
Right.
Whew, yeah, I was wrong. It was a learning experience, a little bit humbling, not going to lie.
Yeah, I get it.
So I think a lot of what we discussed for the previous question, I think,
pertains here,
addresses this.
Right. But what I find interesting, though, is being able to understand how, like, we're not looking for, I think, an absolute answer here, right? Because even if we're searching for that absolute answer is going to be different for each individual, and for each individual, that absolute answer may be different at different points in their life.
This goes back to the person who said pills are never the answer. And that's, I think, where they might be slightly misled, because they are for some people.
Yeah.
And we don't know. Yeah, like you said, I really think it's a very individual thing. We have a mutual friend who tried it, and it just didn't work for her because the side effects were just too much.
Right.
And, I fully respect her for understanding her body well enough to not continue and be miserable while taking these.
Right.
So I think it's going to be something people are really just going to have to work through with their doctors or providers, whomever they're sourcing the drug from.
Here's another thing. Well, someone asked about the effect of drugs on muscle mass. So we addressed that. So there was a drug called Saxenda, a similar drug that has resulted in at least 2 deaths in Australia. So it says Saxenda and Victoza have the same active ingredient, and liraglutide, which is liraglutide, and should not be used together or with other GLP receptor agonist medicines. If not, it is not known if Saxenda is safe and effective taken with other prescriptions, over-the-counter medicines, or herbal weight loss products. There seems to be a 5% chance of serious complications. So how should I be concerned about the potentiality for a disastrous outcome?
So I think this comes back to any drug. There's going to be adverse reactions to any drug if enough people are taking it.
Right.
If 2 people passed away, that's terrible. But out of how many people who were taking the drug? Those drugs have been around for quite a while.
Right.
If 2 people out of, say, 10 to 20,000 people have died, is that risk is acceptable to me. In terms of drug-drug interactions, which I believe, is what they're worried about with this, to me, it kind of makes sense that you wouldn't take, so the end of those words were glutide, right? Semaglutide, liraglutide. They have they work on the same thing in the body. Why would you take more of them? Why would you take 2 of those?
That's a good question.
Because
and then who prescribed that, and was that?
It'd be kind of like taking a Tylenol and Advil at the same time.
Right, and I would, in a situation like this, I think I differ a little bit, because even 2 deaths to me would be,
I don't want anyone to die, but.
Now, once again, I think we'd have to look at the individual cases, because to say that 2 people died when they were taking this drug does not necessarily mean that the drug was a catalyst to their death.
Right, we don't know their history at all.
We don't know what their history is. So I'm not trying to say that the drug didn't cause it. I'm just saying that if we take these 2 cases and just hearing about it, we may not know what it is.
Going back to, and this will probably be controversial, but I have a friend who is a very intelligent person, has a PhD in neuroscience, but when the COVID vaccine came out, she was watching the FDA adverse events website like a hawk. And she told me every day all the adverse events that were happening with the vaccine. And she's not wrong. It did have adverse effects in people. But there was such a small, so many people were getting it at the same time, to such a small percentage of effect. And while I will say, yes, you never want to hear about anybody dying from a drug, there's no way to prevent it.
Right.
People are different. We have, like if you have you may have a genetic thing where you don't metabolize something quite as well as other people.
Right.
And therefore you're going to have this reaction to a drug that there's no way to predict.
Right.
It happens.
Right.
And I'm not trying to be callous because it's clearly catastrophic when it does for people. But there's no practical way to actually account for every person's different physiology and how they're going to react.
So how can we, or is there a possibility for us to put into place some type of mechanism to see at least that we can function in a manner that could be somewhat preventative of there being an outcome for this for anybody?
But that's what the FDA does. Drugs go through 3 phases of clinical trials before they come to market. And those are pretty extensive trials. And the first one, they just give it to healthy people and make sure that nothing happens.
Right, okay.
The safety.
Right.
The FDA is their primary concern is that it's not creating harm before they worry about what it's doing or if it could help people.
Gotcha.
So if you, and I understand why we have some reasons why we're all a little skeptical about government-run things, but to a certain extent you have to trust the FDA if you ever want to take any kind of drug ever.
We pretty much have no choice, at least in this country.
Exactly.
Right.
So you can see, because the European Union has their own regulatory agency, as do other countries. And so, you can compare, but these drugs are available through the European Union as well. So they've passed the safety protocols for many different countries. Right. Which is, and I think in general, they're actually pretty safe. Right. I think like the milder adverse effects of the nausea, the, diarrhea, constipation, bloating, I think those are more common than these more serious effects that people do have.
Let me see, there was someone else that, I know this person is the reason why I'm chuckling a little bit. I have been on Trulicity, Mounjaro, and Ozempic for diabetes for many years, and believe it or not, it didn't make me lose weight. They're all expensive, and because of people using it for weight loss at one time, I couldn't get Trulicity for that reason. I want to know what effect it will have in the long run. I'm on several medications for diabetes and feel they will affect my overall health. I don't know enough about Ozempic and want to know more. That's a loaded question because there's a couple of different parts to it that I feel really strongly about. I have always been very interested in, because I was pre-diabetic for a long time. Well, I actually haven't had blood work in a while. I probably still am. But, diet can actually treat diabetes. I mean, if you look at the works of Dr. Fung and some other people, they may not be perfect, but in general, if you do have a lower carb diet, it's pretty well accepted now that helps. So what is diabetes? There's 2 different forms, but we're going to talk about the common form, which is insulin resistance. Insulin resistance, right. Right? And that is because your insulin receptors no longer work because they've been inundated too much. And so they internalize, they're not there. They've
and so
retired.
Insulin doesn't do what it needs to do to get the sugar out of your bloodstream. Right. So you get the bad parts of diabetes. And of course, insulin makes you fat because it pulls the sugar into your fat cells, but that's its job. It's there to keep everything regulated. So diabetes is a really complex disorder. Right. And so just treating it with drugs, unfortunately, I don't think any good doctor is going to also add that diet component to it. I mean, I'm not saying you got to go full keto, but to manage, maybe keep your carbs within a certain time period, or manage whatever. That's a doctor thing, not me thing. Right.
But you're not wrong.
I didn't think you disagreed. So that was one part right there. The drugs, I think one of the differences, and I have to go back and check, but again, he said he was on Ozempic and
Trulicity, Mounjaro, and Ozempic. I'm assuming not at the same time. I'm assuming.
I hope not.
Right.
So Mounjaro is the diabetes version of Zepbound. They're the same thing, just marketed differently. And then Ozempic is the diabetes form of Wegovy. Right. Same compound, different FDA approvals. Right. I think there's different doses involved too. So I think for semaglutide, You can go up to a certain dose for diabetes, but they can go to a higher dose with Wegovy for weight loss.
Oh, okay.
So that could be why, because if this person was having it prescribed specifically for diabetes, they might not have actually gotten to a high enough dose to actually see the weight loss. Because we have to titrate up.
That's really interesting. I would never thought about that, especially if they were prescribed for diabetes. That could be, but the thing about it is that the way they're marketed, the way it can be perceived can be a little bit confusing. Because they're saying, well, I'm taking this for diabetes, because the commercials say that. Exactly. But then we found out you can lose weight. Exactly. And here we are. This person, oh, well, this is great. I mean, I'm going to take care of my diabetes, and I should be able to, fluff off a few pounds here. And it's like, what? Why didn't it happen to me?
So going back to the FDA, when they have the FDA approvals for the two different conditions, I believe they have different dose ranges.
It's very interesting. I would never thought about that. I think that's all we have with the questions.
Okay.
So, as far as your journey goes, I'm seeing that you've been progressing, right? You've been progressing.
I had COVID last month.
We're not laughing at COVID. We're not laughing at COVID. We're not laughing at COVID.
It was miserable. I actually was really sick, but I didn't eat for a week.
You didn't eat for a week, so you're on the COVID weight loss plan, right?
Yeah. Well, then it rebounded a little bit,
Yeah.
but no, it's been a slow but steady journey for me. Like I said, it's a little under a pound a week, but it's been 9-10 months now, and it's starting to show, and I feel better,
Right.
and I have more energy to work out when I come to the gym.
Right.
So, I'm happy with it. I hope it can, we're all nervous about the insurance and everything else. I'm lucky my insurance is at the moment is covering it. But my prior authorization expires next month, which is terrifying, but hopefully it'll be fine and they haven't changed anything and I'll just be able to get another one for 6 months.
Right.
If not, some of those other options we've discussed, because of the shortages, I have investigated some of them myself.
Right.
And I am a pharmacologist. I do have a PhD in pharmacology, so I'm fairly comfortable with using some of the compounded drugs and the other mechanisms.
So ultimately, I'm going to think that we've come to the consensus that it's going to be an individual basis whether someone should be utilizing the medications or not, and just to be safe. And that there probably are, I know from the Hollywood standpoint, you're seeing all these people who are showing up that have never been skinny before, but all of a sudden, they're on the runways, wearing outfits that they could have never worn like a year or two ago. But I just, first of all, that's not my area of where I work, but I just think that if we can look past some of the public relations rhetoric that's out there and just say, like, this is really going to be primarily about people's health and wellness. And that if we're looking at it from that standpoint, that it's not the answer, but I think you utilized this term last episode, that it's a tool.
Yeah, it's part of the kit to get everything done.
It's part of the toolbox.
We did talk about the money part earlier, and for that, I did see the South Park episode on it, where it's like it's
it's
right
outrageous.
Now, it is.
It was South Park.
But I'm saying I'm lucky. My insurance is covering it. It's $30 a month for me. It's accessible. There's so many people for whom it isn't,
right?
And they would benefit from it, but they just can't afford it, and that's very unfortunate. And I understand why they would be resentful.
Right.
Because it's not fair.
Right.
It's not really the way it should be.
Right. It should be available for people.
But that doesn't mean I'm going to stop doing it and
I get it.
And I will do everything to advocate for them and help them get it too. But it isn't fair.
Right.
And that's not right.
But I think that where we're headed, hopefully, no matter what administration takes over, that we will be headed into a place where this is going to be put higher on the priority list, and that hopefully whatever the outcome is going to be, it's going to be something that's going to be beneficial to most people, because it's a problem.
It is.
It's a problem.
And I'm going to also say, and I said this a little bit the last time we talked, but these two drugs are approved right now. That there's a third one that's going to be approved probably late 2025. It should be available in 2026 that hits a third mechanism. And I did a quick search, and there's a lot of research going on. Like they're talking about putting semaglutide with something else that actually, can hit a second one. There's at least, and then there's a lot of people who want to see if they can find a pill form that will work so that people don't have to do the injections. So there's lots of, because it's making so much money.
Right.
The drug companies are invested right now.
Right.
And so I think within 5 to 10 years, we're going to have a lot more options,
Right.
which hopefully will make the prices more competitive and make it more accessible to anyone that it might actually help.
And people are still going to have to eat well and move well. That's not going anywhere.
No,
We're still going to have to
definitely
do
not.
that. Still going to have to do that. So, Kathy, thanks again for joining me. It's always a pleasure.
oh.
It's always a pleasure. What are we doing here?
I don't
It's
know.
always a pleasure. So thanks so much. And we're going to have you on again as we progress, because I think the people who are watching the show are going to want to hear more about your personal journey, as long as you're willing to share it.
Oh, absolutely.
Awesome.
Because I think it helps to put a face on it, because some people had never talked about it before, and I'm just kind of casual about it, and then they have a lot of questions, because we hear the fear stories and we hear some of the judgmental things, but people who are actually doing well on it are their voices are a little quieter.
Awesome.
So even though I may get ridiculed for taking the easy way out, I'm okay with that. I don't care what those people think.
We're all okay with that.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much.
You need to know.
This is a presentation of the obesity trends as studied by the CDC, the Center for Disease Control of the United States. And this is a study that began in 1985, and it follows the obesity trends based upon two criteria. The body mass index, which is an indicator that is determined by someone's height and weight to determine what their body size is and how healthy it is or unhealthy it is. And the other criteria is for someone to be 30 pounds overweight. And it begins in 1984, with most of the states having not rendered any data. But the states who have rendered data show that some of them have populations of less than 10% that meet that criteria of obesity. And some of the states have 10 to 14% of their population that meet that criteria. So as we continue, we see that more states are reporting that data. In 1986, we find that more states are reporting, and there's a trend that shows some states that have less than 10% obesity rate, and some of those states are now recording 10 to 14%. Now, as we go through the following years, we see that more states are reporting, and there's a greater level of states that are showing a higher level of obesity rates in their population. As we get to 1990, we have just a few states that have not reported, but the states who have reported is that most of them are showing that those obesity rates are growing. Few of them have 10 or less percent, and more of them are showing a percentage of 10 to 14%. Now in 1991, we have a new category where we see that some states are reporting 15 to 19% of obesity rates in their state. So the trend continues, with more states are showing that the obesity rates are growing. Now we have all the states finally reporting, and we have these new categories. And as we go further into the study, we see that more states are trending to higher obesity rates until we get to 1997, where we have a whole new category that shows up. 20% or more obesity rates in 3 states. And as we continue, we see more states adopting that higher percentage until we get to 2001. And what do we see? A whole new category. The first state shows up with a 25% or higher obesity rate, and more states adopting higher obesity rates in comparison to the remaining. As a matter of fact, you can see only one state remains at that 10 to 14%, and there are no more states that have 10% or less obesity rates. And as we continue, we see it starts to trend even higher, where more states are going up to 20 to 25%, and more states are adopting the 25 and above level. And as we get to 2005, we see a whole new category where we see new states are adopting a 30 plus percentage of obesity rates. And it continues until we see more of those states adopting higher levels. As a matter of fact, only one state remaining in that 15 to 19%, and no states at less than 10 or 10 to 14%. And it continues until we see a trend at 2009 where most of the states have higher obesity rates and only one state at 15 to 19%. And as we progress up until recent history, we'll see that the progression is even more staggering. With the American obesity rate being approximately 40% and 18% being seriously obese to morbidly obese, and these obesity rates climbing primarily in children, as well as the complications associated with obesity, such as cardiovascular disease, joint diseases, diseases of the liver, asthma, sleep apnea, and the like, it's not a wonder that 20 years ago, science introduced new medications called GLP-1 agonists as a means to address this current situation. So let's learn a little bit about GLP-1 agonists and how they work.
What are GLP-1 agonists? GLP-1 agonists are a class of medications that mainly help manage blood sugar levels in people with type 2 diabetes. Some GLP-1 agonists can also help treat obesity. GLP-1 agonists are most often injectable medications, meaning they require an injection of a liquid medication with a needle and syringe. The major class of GLP-1 agonists is the semaglutide. The most noted drug of this class is Ozempic. How does Ozempic work? It increases a certain receptor called GLP-1, which slows down the digestion process. As a result, there is a decrease in appetite and cravings, so the individual no longer experiences bouts of excess hunger. So the users of GLP-1 drugs eat less and consequently lose weight. It also improves the beta cells of the pancreas to assist in the restoration of insulin levels and can in fact improve insulin resistance, which is a major factor in weight gain and metabolic disease. It also assists in preventing the overproduction of sugar in the liver while also slowing down the breakdown of glucose from the liver. This has made medications of this type prevalent for the treatment of diabetes and high blood sugar. Semaglutides also act on ghrelin receptors in the brain. Ghrelin is the hormone responsible for making one feel hungry when other hormones like leptin are not blocking it. Since semaglutide blocks ghrelin, you feel less hungry throughout the day. Many semaglutide users say the medication aids in the reduction of constantly thinking about food during the day. Although Ozempic is the most prominent medication of its type, there are other similar brands such as Rybelsus, Wegovy, Trulicity, Victoza, and Mounjaro.
Thank you again for joining us here at the 50 Plus Fit Club. And always remember this: all good things can come to you. Your dream of health can come true. The health you have can be divine, but it will take some work and time. Your life's decisions must be wise, so please eat well and exercise. Keep away from stress and strife, and let God bless you with a wonderful life. Always remember to put your heart and soul in the goal.